Hi everyone, I'm Heather and that's Chantel, and we are Book Wild. So today we are both going to be doing our July wrap up. We're trying things a little bit differently this time. I'm going to do all of my books in the beginning. Chantel is going to do her books all at the end. We'll put a timestamp if you want to skip ahead to Chantel. Totally fine, I won't be offended. All right, so I guess I should start. In the month of July, I read 17 books, which I think is the most I've ever read in a single month in my entire life. I read 3 nonfiction books, 1 young adult, 7 fiction, 2 thrillers, 3 graphic novels, and 1 fantasy. And 6 of those were 5 stars, 8 were 4 stars, and there were 3 stars. So it was a really happy reading month. That's probably why I read so much, was because I liked all of the books I was reading. So I am going to go in order that I read them, just because it's easier for me to think about them that way. The first book that I read this month was The Five: The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper by Hallie Rubenhold. So I heard about this from Jean Bookish Thoughts. We will link a description to her channel down below. This is a story about, and I don't have it, I listened to it on audiobook from Scribd, I believe. But it is a nonfiction story about the lives of the women that were killed by Jack the Ripper. And it was the best nonfiction book that I've ever read. It was written in such a, as a narrative, it didn't feel like I was reading a nonfiction book. And it gives the stories of all these women's lives in this woman empowerment way. It gives a lot about the struggles for women during that time, and how once you were a shamed woman, it was almost impossible to recover from that. And I just loved it. I loved it so much. Okay, so I gave that book 5 stars, and I highly recommend it to people who generally like nonfiction, or are interested in true crime, or are interested in female history. Is that a thing?
Female empowerment. Yeah.
Female empowerment. Yeah. I was very pleasantly surprised by that book.
See, I am not super into true crime or things like that. But when you say female empowerment, then I kind of want to oh, now I'm interested.
The next book that I read is Let's Go Swimming on Doomsday by Natalie C. Anderson. I rated this 4 stars. It's a young adult story about a young boy and a religious terrorist group that he has to infiltrate to help save his brother. The only other thing I'll say about this book right now is that the author is a white woman, and she took a moment to acknowledge that this isn't an Own Voices story, but she works with a lot of Somalian refugees and boys, and this is a story that she felt needed to be told, and I appreciated that she acknowledged that this isn't her story. So the next book that I read was The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. This was a reread for me. You've probably heard me and Chantel both talk about this book constantly. I rated it 5 stars. I'm not going to go too much into why I love it so much, but it is, I will say this, it's the most beautifully written book that I've ever read. The Shadow of the Wind is a story about a boy named Daniel who falls in love with this book and tries to find out about the mysterious origins of this author. And through that, you learn about his life in the bookshop and his love interest and what is happening in post-war Barcelona. And it's just such a beautiful story. Anyone who loves books should read this book.
I agree. I read it recently and loved it.
The next book that I read is The Family Upstairs by Lisa Jewell. I listened to this on audiobook. It is a thriller. This was the best thriller that I've read all year. It's written in a way where you don't know who is really telling the story, and I thought that was really well done, really well written, and I definitely recommend. Next, I read The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I actually have Chantel's copy here. I rated this 4 stars. I'm sure everyone on BookTube knows what this is about. I didn't like this as much as I thought that I would. The one critique that I have is I feel like what it means to be bisexual is like hit over your head constantly. And as a bisexual woman, I was like, girl, we get it. But after talking to Chantel, I realized people need to understand fully what being bisexual means. And in that regard, I appreciated it. But when I was reading it, I was like, girl, okay. Yeah, but overall, I would recommend. The next book that I read was I Am Malala by Malala Yousafzai. I actually borrowed this from Chantel as well. I rated this 3 stars. I think her story is very powerful, obviously, but the writing style made it hard for me personally to connect with her story, and I didn't really feel like I got a good slice of her life. Like I feel like I don't know her, you know?
I think I felt that way also when I read it.
Yeah. So the next that I read was Saga Volume 1. I loved this graphic novel. I gave this 4 stars. I can see why so many people love it and highly recommend if you like graphic novels. It is basically about 2 people who fall in love that aren't supposed to be in love, and they have a baby, and they're struggling to protect their family and to fight prejudice as well. I guess I should have thought about this. The next book that I read was The Wife Between Us by Greer Hendricks. My sister recommended this to me, and I listened to it on audiobook. This was another really good thriller. I gave this 4 stars as well. I was genuinely surprised at something that happens, like genuinely surprised at the twist, or one of the twists. It was really well written. It's about a woman who her ex-husband is getting remarried, and she is struggling to deal with it. It was really good. So the next few books are the ones that I read for the reading rush. The first that I read was The Underground Abductor by Nathan Hale. I actually borrowed this from Chantel as well. I gave this 4 stars. I liked it a lot. I loved the story of Harriet Tubman. I loved the artwork. I just at times felt like it was a little choppy going from different parts of the story to other parts of the story. And there was some information about her life that wasn't included in this that I have read about in other books. But overall, highly recommend. The next book that I read for the Reading Rush, also any of the books that I talk about for the Reading Rush, I did vlog the whole week, and I will put descriptions, or I will put links to the videos in the description. Chantel has hers as well. So I read No Country for Old Men by Cormac McCarthy. I didn't really like the writing. It was almost identical, or the movie is like almost identical to this. So I didn't feel like I got anything out of this that I didn't get from the movie. And overall, I gave it 3 stars because I feel like if I hadn't watched the movie, I would have enjoyed the book a lot more. But meh. So the next book that I read for the Reading Rush was In the Dream House by Carmen Maria Machado. I don't have it with me because I lent it to my sister, but it is a memoir about Carmen Maria Machado and an abusive female relationship. I gave this 4 stars. I loved and didn't love the storytelling or the narrative. It's kind of written as like a folk tale or a fable, and I thought it was really interesting and innovative, but I had a hard time like connecting to that part of the story. But the story itself and the way that she tells it is very powerful, and bringing attention to, like in the beginning, she talks about how important it is to not only focus on the celebration of minorities, but also to talk about the violence that happens within a minority group, or the abuse that happens within a minority group, because if it's not talked about, then people who are experiencing it within a minority group may not know how to deal with it, or may not know how to ask somebody else for help, because they're like, oh, this isn't happening to anyone else. None of my other lesbian friends are being abused, so it can't be happening to me. And talking about it becomes this like powerful tool. So I really enjoyed that part of it. But overall, I gave it 4 stars. I recommend it to anybody who likes lesbians or who wants to learn how to navigate an abusive relationship, or what signs to look out for an abusive relationship. So the next book that I read for the reading rush is A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms by George R.R. Martin. This is a prequel to the Game of Thrones Song of Ice and Fire series. I borrowed it from my sister, so I don't have it here. It follows the story of Dunk, this like bumbling knight, and his squire, who ends up being Aegon the Fifth or something. I don't know. But it's just a really cute and fun story. There's still like political intrigue, but it's not as heavy as like the entire series. It's 3 novellas, really cute, really fun, and I was happy to like be visiting the world of Westeros again. So I gave that one 5 stars. Next thing that I read was Saga Volume 2. I loved this volume so much. I gave this 5 stars. I liked it so much more than the first. Have you read these? I can't remember. Okay.
No.
You should borrow them.
Oh, I for sure will.
But it just continues to follow them as they are being hunted. Alana and Marco. They are both so attractive, and it makes me feel so weird, but I highly recommend. If you were like iffy on the first one, it gets so good in this volume. And I just went out and bought the 3rd and 4th volume, so I can continue on like right away.
I'll borrow 2.
Okay. The next book that I read was A Man Called Uwe. Is that what we decided?
Uva.
Okay. By Frederick Bachman. This was I loved this book so much. It made me cry. It made me happy. Everyone should read this. It's not like a life-changing book, and it is just so cute. And Chantel is reading this now.
Right now.
How far are you in?
I think only about 40 pages.
Oh, it's so good. So good. Really quickly, this is the story of an old grumpy man who is struggling between his like grumpy side and his really sweet and wonderful and kind heart. And you watch his relationship with himself and with his neighbors develop, and it is just so sweet. Such an emotional, sweet little story. Highly recommend. So the last book that I read for the reading rush was Patsy by Nicole Dennis Benn. I heard about this book from Jesse from Bowties and Books. I had a lot of feelings reading this book. I gave it 5 stars. There is so much to unpack. It is the story of a woman who is torn between her identity as a woman and her identity as a mom, and the choices that she makes and the journey that she goes on, what it means to be an immigrant in America, what it means to learn your identity. Like, there's just so much about this book. I didn't love reading it, but I loved that I read it, if that makes sense. 5 stars. The second to last book that I read was A Prisoner of Heaven by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. I rated this like 3.5 stars. This is the second book in the Cemetery of Forgotten Books series after Shadow of the Wind. We learn more about one of the characters, Fermin, and his history and how he became involved in Daniel's life. This is a disappointing book for me because it felt so rushed. All of the other books that I've read in this series have been very well thought out, very well developed, and this was confusing for me in a few different ways. I cannot wait for Chantel to read this and the next book that I'm going to talk about, because I have so much that I want to talk about.
I'm picking it up soon.
Yes, you can borrow mine unless you're buying them.
I would like to borrow yours. I do want to buy them, but I want like a matching set. So
yeah, I don't have a matching set. They're all like all over the place. Yeah, so it felt kind of rushed. I've heard that he rushed it to meet publishing deadlines, and that's just really unfortunate because I wanted to know more about this character. And there's also a character who shows up in this book from the prequel, which I'm going to talk about next. And I had a lot of questions. But overall, like, it's still so beautifully written. I still love the characters, and I loved reading it. So I gave it 3.5 stars. 17th book that I read this month is The Angel's Game by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. This is the prequel to The Shadow of the Wind, and we learn about someone completely unrelated to, so we think, the Semperi family that we fall in love with in The Shadow of the Wind. This follows an author named David Martine, who is contacted by this anonymous publisher to write a religious book. There's a lot going on in this book. I am so glad that I read this and the prequel, or this and the second book, back to back, because when I finished this book, I was so mind fucked. Like, I don't remember. This is technically a psychological thriller, apparently. It is. I don't even know. I don't even know what to say. I cannot wait, again, for Chantel to read these because I have so many theories specifically about this and The Prisoner of Heaven that I want to talk to Chantel about. But I gave it 4.5 stars. I, again, love the writing. There's just so many questions that I have that I'm really hoping are answered in the third book in the series, which is what I'm picking that up in the month of August. So hopefully it will all come together and we'll have some clarity. But this series, man, it gets me. You guys have read any of these books, or you want Chantel to read any of these books, comment down below and let us know. Okay, so those are all of the books that I read in the month of July. It was a really great reading month for me. Now, Chantel, tell me about yours.
So I read 9 books in total this month, and if I'm looking down, I have my notes in front of me. So I read 2 fantasy, 2 memoir, 2 fiction, 1 romance, 1 sci-fi, and 1 nonfiction that wasn't a memoir. I read 7 adult books and 2 young adult books. And for star ratings, I had 3 books that I did not rate because of memoir and nonfiction. But I had 2 5 stars, 1 4 star, 1 3 star, and 2 2 stars.
Interesting. Yeah. Ooh, I can't wait to see which are your 2 stars.
So why do we do that?
Every tingle time I was like, so the next book that I read.
I can't. The first book that I picked up this month was Becoming by Michelle Obama, and I absolutely loved this book. I think it was so well written, and it just humanizes Michelle and the Obama family in a way that everybody knows about them and knows of them. And no matter what or for me, I thought, no matter what your political affiliation is with the Obamas, this is just a beautiful story of, oh, it's a little bit shiny. It's a beautiful story of a working mom who was kind of thrust into a role that she didn't necessarily ask for, and I loved it. I don't rate memoirs or nonfiction, but if I did, it would be 900 stars.
Yeah. I truly feel like Michelle Obama is my best friend. Like, I feel like I know her so well. We could just go chit chat on the back porch. Like, I love her.
Yeah, it was so casual and fun, and it really, it felt like I had a good, well, they were on a global platform for 8 years, so you feel like you know them
Yeah.
as it is, but with this memoir, you feel like you get an even closer look, and it was just, I loved it. The second book that I read this month was Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston, and this was really interesting to pick up right after I finished Becoming, because this is a romance between the son of the first female president of the United States and the Prince of Wales, I think. And it was just really interesting to have a really close look at what life in the White House is like, and then to pick up a fiction about it. And I kind of, because I did read Becoming, the first couple of chapters of this, I was like, I don't know. It took me a couple chapters to get over that, because this is fiction and, shift gears. But oh boy, when there was a certain point when I listened to the audiobook, which I highly recommend. Also, at first, the audiobook I didn't love, and then as I got more into it, I highly recommend. This was so good. I rated this 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. The romance is sweet, and the characters are, I think, well-rounded and individuals. They all have their own personalities. They're a lot of fun. I highly recommend this. I thought it was so good, and a really fun read that's like heartwarming, and just you speed through it. So if you want something that you won't want to put down, this one.
I cannot wait to read that. I'm so excited. I don't know why. Like, I don't care about romances, but for some reason, I don't know if it's because it's like people talk about it so much, but I really want to read that book.
I think I've never really cared for romance before, like, the end of last year. And even remember when we were at Greenhand Books and I was like looking for romance books and I didn't really find any.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know what it is. Like, some romance books, I have a couple on here. Like this one, which is kind of about Dwayne Johnson, which I would love. Like, it was cute. I really liked it when I read it, but I probably would never read it again. It's a romance, like a rom-com. And I have a couple, like, I don't care for it, but like this romance, if every fucking romance that I picked up, it would be the only thing I read. I wouldn't pick up anything else. I also picked up early in the month The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness by Michelle Alexander. This book is about the state of mass incarceration within the United States and how there has been, and how a new underclass has been created because of mass incarceration and this war on drugs, and how Black men in particular are sentenced and imprisoned at rates much higher than any other population, even though they make up a smaller percentage of the population. I highly recommend this. I thought this was a really important and impactful read. It has helped me understand the country that I live in and a lot of what is happening in our country right now, and especially with the Black Lives Matter movement, gave me a lot of information to think about and to unpack and to help me navigate conversations with friends and family members who are trying to figure out what it means to be anti-racist. So to read The New Jim Crow right after picking up Becoming by Michelle Obama was very interesting, because in Michelle's memoir, she talks about a Father's Day event that Barack spoke at, and how, when he was first campaigning, and this was the first backlash they got for him in the presidency, and it came from the Black community. And actually, Michelle Alexander talks about that in her book, and in what he was speaking on, which was how fathers in Black communities are missing. But he did not go into detail about why it is they're missing and where they are. And there was there was backlash from the Black community and a lot of criticism there, because the way that Michelle Alexander puts it in The New Jim Crow is that that was an opportunity for him to talk about mass incarceration and how mass incarceration affects Black men and Black families. And I think that was a missed opportunity there. So that was really interesting to have those two views kind of back to back, not intentionally, but I borrowed it from the library on audiobook. I do want to get my own copy and read through it again and write down some notes and some questions that I had, but highly recommend. And I did not rate that book because I don't rate nonfiction. Also, for our July Shoots and Ladders TBR, I picked up In the Time of Butterflies by Julia Alvarez. So this book is about four sisters who grow up under the dictatorship in the Dominican Republic. It chronicles their lives from when they're very young to going away to boarding school, becoming adults, and having children. And it just shows how hard life can be living in a country with a dictatorship. I rated this book 3 stars. I really liked the first half of the book, and then as I got into the middle of the book, I started to lose interest, and I was really connecting with the characters at first, and then for whatever reason, the book kind of lost its spark, and I didn't care as much what happened to the characters.
And that's a bummer, though, because I remember when you picked that, I was like, oh, we talked about it a little bit more, and I was like, oh, that sounds really interesting. I would want to read that too.
I liked the beginning of it. The middle to the end was not for me. I stopped connecting with the characters and I stopped caring. Yeah. The first book that I picked up for the reading rush was The House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. I liked this book. I rated it 4 stars. I had to adjust my expectations. I talked about this in my blog, but I thought it was adult. It's young adult. So once I kind of readjusted for that, I really enjoyed it. It was a fun ride. The romance is really sweet, and I recommend if you like YA adult. I recommend if you like young adult fantasy. This is a good one. I probably will continue with the series when it continues. For the reading rush, I also picked up the Jane Austen Book Club by Karen Joy Fowler. This one I swapped out for The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I had watched the movie years ago. I used to love the movie when I was in college, and I haven't seen it in a couple years, so I picked this up. It was pretty short. I rated this 2 stars. I liked the beginning, and when I first started reading this, I liked the beginning. I got more backstory to the characters, and they got more depth, and I loved that for 2 of the characters. And then for the other 4 characters, it's about 6 people who come together to read the Jane Austen novels. For the 4 other characters, I felt like the book did nothing for their character development, and even I thought that the movie did some things better. And this book had a weird narrative style. It was written from the perspective of the entire book club, but it wasn't the book club writing the book. I didn't like it. I have 2 stars. For the reading rush, I read Gathered Together in My Name by Maya Angelou. This was a very hard read for me. I really, really liked it at first, and Angela's writing and her imagination. And as she got more into her story in her later years, or not later years, this is mostly takes place in her late teens. But as she gets more into her story of raising her son and looking for work and trying to find love, it was heartbreaking. It was a very, very good read. I'm glad I read it, and I recommend it for people who like nonfiction and memoirs. I think I did go into more depth on this in my reading vlog, which we will link below.
Go watch it.
The last book that I read for the reading rush was The Deep by River Solomon, but there were also other contributors, which was David Diggs, William Huston, and Jonathan Snipes. I loved this book. I rate it 5 stars. I loved the characters. I loved the story. I loved the premise. I thought it was very well done for how short it is. I highly recommend. I loved it.
So I did not like The Deep at all. I mean, and I think Chantel and I are planning on doing a book talk because we have completely different opinions about this book, and I think it will have a lot to talk about. So keep an eye out for that.
And the last book I read this month was Good Morning Midnight by Lily Brooks Dalton. This is a sci-fi young adult story about a man who is all about astronomy and research and science and learning about the galaxy and stars, as well as an astronaut who is in outer space voyaging on a trip to collect research to bring back to Earth. And for both individuals, communications to the rest of society completely go black. And then towards the end of the story, their storylines intertwine and they have communication with each other. But this book, I feel like it missed the mark. I loved the premise. There were 2 storylines that you don't know how they're connected at first, and then they kind of weave themselves together. That is my absolute favorite thing in books, and I did like the way that this did it, but I think there was missed opportunity here. This also has an open ending, which I don't hate. I do like open endings. I have a lot of questions about what was happening, and I feel like the answers to those questions are more interesting than what actually happened in the book, if that makes sense. So this was, I think I rated this a 2-star. It's a 2 or a 3-star at this point. It's been about a week since I finished it, and I'm kind of indifferent. So maybe I'll bump it up to a 3 stars. But yeah.
It's so funny now that we're like saving talking about the books for when we're filming together. I am like, I don't know. I'm like, oh my God, she cheated on me. She didn't tell me that she was reading this. Like, I don't like, I'm like, I don't know how to feel. I feel like you've been hiding things from me. You know what I mean? Or am I crazy?
No, because at one point I was watching your vlog for the reading rush and was like, I didn't know that.
How dare she not tell me?
And he was like, how am I finding out the same time as everybody else? These are the books we read this month. Thank you for watching, and we will catch you in the next one. Goodbye. Take 5.
Now we'll do one together.
Or maybe we just film something. You recommend it. I do like nonfiction, and you recommend it.
Did the power just go out?
Right.
Meh. Hey, everyone.
Hello, all.
It is me, Chantel.
It's me. Check my video out.
We're working with what we got here, people.